It's my good fortune to introduce tonight's multi-talented reader, Ron Koertge. Ron is not a fan of long bios, so I'll try to be brief, even though there's a lot to say about him. Ron has published more than 20 books of poetry and has had many poems published in independent journals. He's had poems anthologized twice in Best American Poetry, received grants from the NEA and California Arts Council, and was a 2017 Pushcart Prize winner. His prose poem, Negative Space, was made into an animated film that was nominated for a 2018 Academy Award in the category of Best Animated Short Film. It explores a father-son relationship and the resonance of specific memories throughout our lives. Ron is also the author of many celebrated novels for teens and young adults. I'm hoping that one of them, his book, Shakespeare Bats Cleanup, will be a sneaky way to lure my baseball fanatic grandson into reading and loving poetry. Ron wants to share with us, for those of us who are writers, that he writes something every day. Quote, rain or shine, ill or well, starting with paper and his favorite gel pen. Billy Collins called Ron's presentations, quote, deliciously smart and entertaining. Tonight we're in for a real treat. Please welcome Ron Koertge.
Okay. All right, very nice to see many of you, some of whom I've seen before. I looked through, I planned the reading a little more than I usually plan because I have so much time, and we'll just see how far we go. I'm going to start with some poems. I'll show you the books I'm reading from. I'm going to read a little bit of prose from one of those YA novels. I can talk a little bit about Negative Space because it was so much fun to go into Hollywood and watch the other short films that were nominated. We knew we would lose to Kobe Bryant because he was Kobe Bryant, but we really had fun talking to these kids who made the movie. But I'm going to start with it's kind of a memory piece. Most of you know who Jerry Laughlin is, Gerald Laughlin. He's a friend of Bill Trowbridge's and a friend of mine and Charles Harper Webb. And he was my friend in graduate school at the University of Arizona. And one of the things Jerry and I did, what Jerry helped me with, was when I was in grad school, I was living kind of hand to mouth. So if I could find a cheaper place to live, Jerry and I would move me. Everything I owned, lived and worked fit into the back of my little Chevrolet. And I would break up with a girlfriend, or I would run out of money, or I would find a cheaper place, or I would get a roommate. And Jerry would help me move. And one day he said to me, because it was onerous, and one day he said to me, you know, Ronnie, he said, there's got to be a better way. And I remember thinking, I wasn't writing a lot then. Jerry introduced me to poetry. Without him, I wouldn't be writing, I don't believe. But I remember thinking that there was something there. It took me 20 years to write the poem, but I finally did. And kids in Pennsylvania made a short film about it. And you can see when you hear it, how specific and how visual it is. It has three characters: the guy who owns the apartment and the furniture and the two burglars. So the whole idea of this poem is the solution to having someone help you move. The poem's called Moving Day. Well, sitting home one night, I hear burglars fiddling with the lock. And this is what I've been waiting for. I run around to the back and open the door. I invite them in and pour some drinks. I tell them to relax, and I help them off with their shoes and their masks. In a little while, we are fast friends, and after a dozen toasts to J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI in general, they begin to carry things out. I point to the hidden silver. I hold the door as they wrestle with the bed, and generally make myself useful. When they get the truck loaded and come back inside for one last brandy, I get the drop on them, and using Spike's gun, I shoot them both and imprint Blackie's prints on the handle. And then I get in their van and drive away to my new apartment. So that solves that problem. I'm just going to drop these things on the ground and I'll know where I am. I was talking to some students last week at the local high school, and about 5:30 my time, I'm going to go to a different Zoom and go back and meet these students again. And I was having them write poems about fairy tale characters. Red Riding Hood was popular. Snow White was popular. And I've written a few of these, and I thought I would read a couple for you. I've been writing for 50 years. I don't know, I must have read 100 times. I must have gone to 50 different schools. And so I've gotten a lot of questions, and I kind of answer them sometimes when I'm doing something like this. One question is, where do you get your ideas? The poem I'm going to read to you is called Gretel on Her Own. No one thinks about fairy tale characters growing up. And in this poem, Gretel is 50 or 55. She's by herself. No one ever thinks of characters in fairy tales passing away and leaving their partners. But that's what happened to Gretel. And here's what she did. Gretel enrolls in night school, a creative writing class. There are other women in their 50s, and one keeps pointing her expensive breasts at the teacher. One has crazy hair and a pentagram. They're nice enough, though. Gretel likes to sit with the young people. The girls treat her like a mom, spilling all kinds of secrets. And their idea of an endearment is to give her a joint or two in an old Sucret's box. Gretel likes the class. The teacher is bigger than she expected, strong like a woodsman, and she's sorry when he hands out the last poem. At home, she sits at the window and smokes. The marijuana makes her sleepy, and before that, she feels, and she learned this word recently, phantasmagorical. The moon is either there or she knows where it is. A forest fills her little yard. A trail of white pebbles leads God knows where. She lets herself cry once a week, and this is the time. Oh, honey, she says, I miss you so much. Don't you think that would be true? All of that, that fairy tale connection, how they went to the forest together, and the evil mother or stepmother in some versions, and how they succeeded to beat all those odds, and then they grow up. So this is a poem about the three bears. This is the book called Lies, Knives, and Girls in Red Dresses. It's a fantastic cover. It's from my kids' book publisher, Candlewick. And it's maybe 20 revisited fairy tales. If someone said to me, where did you get the idea for this? I would say, in the story of the three bears, it occurred to me pretty early on that it was odd that the bears could talk to each other, because not all bears can, they're bears. But these, the little bear and the middle-sized bear and the great bear have made a family. And that's what this poem deals with. I remember how mysterious I felt the morning that I wrote this poem. I had a rough draft that it wasn't going anywhere. And I can talk about that to people like you because you write and you know what it's like to be thwarted by a draft that seems promising. But that morning, this poem came together. The title is, of course, The Little Small Wee Bear, and he's the narrator. Here's what he says. The great huge bear is not my father. The middle-sized bear is not my mother, but because we walk on two legs and because we talk, we naturally found each other. The shambling, shuffling, hibernating, honey-loving, man-killing bears treat us gingerly and with great suspicion. We are not human and not animal. I am not a boy or a beast, but a wee bear, something in between. We live a quiet life in our cottage. We sleep, sit, and eat oatmeal. And every morning we walk while our breakfast cools. Humans usually come for advice about their health, both of the body and the spirit. The middle-sized bear knows the forest like the back of her paw. Her tinctures and potions rarely fail. And sometimes they only need to be embraced, face down in our fur, where they weep like their human hearts will break. Goldilocks wanted to disrupt our lives, eat our food, criticize our furniture, and soil our beds with her human stink. She was a sign, said the great huge bear, sign of the end times. First arrogant, unruly youth with colored hair, and then gay marriage, and then earthquakes in diverse places, and then a giant comet, and finally the apocalypse. Goldilocks just sneered at him. Then out the window she went, scrambling toward the deep part of the forest where it's dark as a mine shaft. We watched her go. Those ridiculous locks were the last thing we saw. And then we heard a scream, and then nothing. What could we do? We had repairs to make, sheets to wash, oatmeal to stir, until it and everything else was just right. It'd be odd to read that poem to a child, don't you think? Very advanced child. I'm going to read a couple of new poems. No, one new poem, and then a kind of request, kind of carom request. And it came sort of from you, but from somebody else and then to me. The new poem is called Graduate Studies, and it was a bet. It wasn't Iowa City, but I was in a college town, and I'd given a reading, and we went out afterwards, and we went to a college bar, and the guy who was driving me around said, "I'll bet you couldn't write a poem about this place." Well, I love a bet, so I took the bet. The characters in the poem are graduate students. In the bar, there were all kinds of students, but I was drawn to this one booth in the corner with these older kids, and who I assume are graduate students. If you can see the poem, I'll hold it up. The dialogue is in italics. It doesn't use quotation marks. This probably won't work, but I'll do it anyway. It's hard to see, but you'll get the idea. There's a few speakers, all of these students. So here's a poem called Graduate Studies, the poem where I won a bet. When a real heartbreaker leans into the jukebox, Garrison sighs and says, "Did you know Venus turned into a virgin every time she took a bath?" Elise counters, "Bullshit. Venus did it with Adonis and Vulcan and Mars, but you didn't have to be low mileage for that crew." Abigail says she wouldn't be a virgin again for $1 million. It hurt, and the guy told me he had to be home by 10 o'clock. Thomas says, "Well, at least you did it. Ruskin never did because Effie Gray's actual pubic hair unnerved him." And Monica says, "Geez, poor Effie Gray." And Nick says, "Don't worry. She dumped Ruskin, married some painter guy, and had 8 kids." Another pitcher of beer appears. Monica and Nick wage a thumb war. Elise falls asleep on Garrison's shoulder. Abigail feeds Thomas popcorn. The way we're sprawled in this curved booth, I wonder if Effie's artist husband could do us justice, or maybe a painter with a darker palette for these cracked leather booths, the false gold of Coors, and so many lopsided hearts carved here and there with a fork. As writers, you know the best detail in this poem is the fork. It just killed me. When I'm writing this, I'm up here in my studio every morning with the cat. And when something good happens, like the last line of this poem, without my saying anything, the cat will usually look up like, good for you. And then, you know how cats, I don't give a shit, right back to sleep. I thought I'd read a poem or two from, actually they're prose poems from Sex World with the very spicy title and cover. These are all flash fiction. And I'll read you from the introduction. You know what flash fiction is, but I love this so much. Flash fiction, the love child of narrative and methamphetamine, is meant to be read in a hurry. It's also called sudden fiction, microfiction, and postcard fiction, but the most charming sobriquet comes from China. Smoke long stories, a narrative that can be read in the time it takes to smoke one cigarette. I just love that. Let me read you a mysterious one first, and then I'll read you Negative Space, the one that was up for the Academy Award. There must be 40 of these in here. I wrote 75 of these in 2 months. I wrote one every day. I got up, took a walk with my wife, came back, drank some coffee, got myself as wired as I can get on caffeine, came upstairs and wrote. The 75, 25 were awful. Just I wouldn't show them to anybody. I wouldn't, certainly not submit them. But a few of them were good. And that was enough to send, to my publisher and have Kate say, I have 40, why don't you write 20 more? And we'll put them together. The title of this one is Twins. There's no further explanation. The idea, because when students say, where do you get your ideas from? I walk around and being available. My idea of writing anyway is to be a doorway for the infinite, which wants to be made finite. So all the ideas are floating around, and I'm the one that some of these stories come through, but only if I'm available. I'm available for this one called Twins. We never argued about who was oldest by a minute or any of that nonsense. We never fought. We were totally simpatico. I could see through her eyes. She could see through mine, even in different rooms. We just looked at each other and we knew everything we needed to know. We were nice to our parents because we needed them for a while, and then we'd leave. Our plan was to live together forever. In grade school, we were charming because it was necessary. In high school, we'd wear slightly different things and then go into the bathroom and change, and I'd be her and she'd be me. Any boyfriend was our boyfriend. They didn't have a clue. And then one day she said death was a bird pecking at her heart. And I said that I felt it also. And we took turns declining. I'd languish and she'd go to school. And then she'd languish and I'd go to school. The doctors were baffled. When I was in the hospital, she'd kiss some boy and I'd get flushed and set the monitors off. I melted away except for the little boat of the soul, our soul, which bobbed merrily. If you ask how she feels without me, I'd say she is not without me. We write and win prizes, and there's her picture in the paper, and behind her, that smeared face in the window is me. It's fun to write those things, but it it puts me in what used to be called in the 50s, 40 or the 60s, I mean, a whole different space. I come down from my studio and, my wife says, are you okay? And I am, but just a little peculiar. So here's negative space. Here's 30 seconds of background. It's about packing and how a boy and his father bond over packing. The boy packs for his dad. I wrote this poem, I wrote the first draft of this poem on an airplane. I was flying somewhere, probably to make a presentation or meet with some high school kids. And I'm reading an in-flight magazine, and of course, it's fluff, those magazines, but there was some information about how to pack. And it was good advice, frankly. And the advice is in the poem. So I won't tell you what it is. You'll see what it is. The ending to this poem gets two different reactions. I guess in a high-spirited reading, because I go to reading sometimes and there's wine, people get a little high. And when I know that they're having a really good time, I don't read this poem because it seems solemn to me. But if I do read it, they laugh at the end. It doesn't bother me, but I tend not to read it. You'll see at the end, you see how it could make people giddy. Anyway, here's the poem, Negative Space. My dad taught me to pack. First, lay out everything, put back half, roll things that roll, wrinkle-prone things on top of cotton things, then pants, waist to hem, nooks and crannies for socks, belts around the sides like snakes, plastic over that, add the shoes, wear heavy stuff on the plane. We started when I was little. I'd roll up socks, and then he'd pretend to put me in the suitcase, and we'd laugh. Some kids, some guys, bond with their dads shooting hoops or talking about cars. We did it over luggage. By the time I was 12, if he was busy, I'd pack for him. Mom tried, but didn't have the knack. And he'd get somewhere, open his suitcase and text me, perfect. And that one word from him meant a lot. The funeral was terrible. Him laid out in that big carton and me crying and thinking, look at all that wasted space. And now some prose. I read from Sex World, which is the flash fiction. And now I'm going to read to you from Strays, still in print, one of my favorite books. For a while, I wrote YA for a long time, almost 2 decades. And I have to admit that in maybe 20 years ago, a lot of YA fiction really was formulaic. If you knew the formula, which is that you start fast, you present the problem, you work with these kids, and you go through and you come to a resolution. And I had friends in the business who could sell a YA novel, they could pitch it with just something like nuclear warfare, divorce between gay parents, just boom, boom, boom. And then this guy would, my friend would take off and write the book. There came to a point, though, where the formula didn't work anymore. The books got better, they got stronger, they got more character oriented. And I always tell, I'll tell you this: if you can write poetry, you could write fiction for young people. You work with words, you guys, all the time. You've read all your lives. It would mean reading some current YA fiction. But if you're interested, we know there's not a lot of money in poetry. There is money in YA fiction. The last contract I got for YA fiction has been probably 12 years ago, and it was $30,000. And then the royalties come in. The real money is in writing for television. I did that for a while, and it was fine. I worked for Hill Street Blues. Some of you are old enough to know that show. It was great, and it was so sort of difficult and time conscious that it gave me a stomach ache. So I went back to teaching, which I was happier with. So from Strays. The backstory is my wife and I were walking maybe 5 blocks from here. My wife was a counselor at the City College where we met and where I taught. And she worked with students with all kinds of disabilities, physical and learning disabilities. And she said to me, you know what, this is a group home. This is about 3 blocks from here. She said, one of the girls who lives here is one of my students. So this falls into the are you available category of writing. And apparently I was available. And I started to wonder, what would it be like, first of all, to be a foster child, which I knew was very difficult. I've had students and they wrote about it, and it's not an easy gig. If you're lucky, you get good foster parents, but a lot of them aren't for various reasons. So I did what I thought was corny at the time. I simply decided to I wrote like a boy. I don't mind writing as a girl, which I've done. I have a really nice book called Margot with an X, and I was Margot, but I didn't do it this time. I wanted to be the boy. So I simply killed his parents. I put them in a car and ran them into the tree, and they died in a fiery crash. So there he was, thrust into foster care. He didn't know anything about it. It happened overnight. The next day, social services comes and takes him to his foster parents, his new foster parents. And these are the opening maybe page and a half. I don't know if you guys write much fiction, but I can often tell right from the jump after a few pages if I'm onto something or not. I have a lot of unfinished stories. They just, for some reason, they stall. They run out of gas like my first car used to. But this one, I thought had some promise. And then I ran into trouble. And I'll tell you what happened and how I got out of it. So here's the opening. Make page and a half. Begins hard and fast. This is Teddy narrating. I don't know where I am. The social worker said she doesn't like to drive the freeways, so it's just one twist and turn after another. And there is somebody else in the van when she picked me up, but he's huddled all the way in the back and I'm in the middle seat. When Ms. Irvin finally pulls over, she says, "This is where Mr. and Mrs. Rafter live, boys. Get your stuff." I've only got a suitcase and a duffel, and the other kid tosses 2 green trash bags out the back. That's got to be Mr. Rafter, peering at us from the porch. My parents owned a pet shop, so I've seen that look before, and it's the one that says, Are you going to pee on the rug or keep me up all night? He doesn't seem happy to see us. Right behind him is a set of plastic chairs, the kind with slats and arms. Mrs. Irvin just points. She's big and frazzled looking, gold shoes, jangly jewelry, the chopstick stuck in a lot of gold, red, gray hair, a briefcase with somebody else's initials on it, and a purse like a bird's nest with handles. You guys have a seat, she says. I've got some paperwork to do inside. And then she turns her back to the house and whispers, I had to beg to get this placement. Don't make me look bad. The kid with the trash bag twists the tops tighter. He doesn't look at me. He doesn't look at her. I like to figure things out. The porch sags. The picnic table needs 2 shims to keep it even. The paint is peeling off the overhang, and that's a 5-year-old truck in the driveway. So money is tight. It's either take in a couple of strangers or dip into savings. And that's where we come in. Foster children. The other foster kid glances at the screen door and whispers, that one looks like a hard ass. What's his name again? Rafter, I think. He points up, like at the ceiling or on a river, maybe. A long time ago, you kind of were what you did. That's why there's a Mr. Shoemaker and a Mr. Baker and, things like that. When animals get to know each other, they dance around and sniff and yip a little and generally see what's up. And that's what Porter, that was his name. That's what Porter and I are doing. Pretty soon it'll either be okay or he'll growl and show his teeth. So he and Porter, my narrator, get taken inside. They're showing that they're rooms. They get the drill. Here's where you live. Here's the bathroom, that kind of thing. And my hero, Teddy, oh dear, well, I'll find it. It won't be far away. Ask Mr. Rafter if he can get on the Gold Line and go back to his hometown, which is just a short ride away. And here's that part. Now, here's what goes on here. You know the setup. It's not unusual. I just keep losing my place. It isn't unusual to put a boy in jeopardy. That's the tension in the story. And the problem is to keep the tension high enough so that readers are interested and then come to some sort of resolution. I didn't know how to resolve this novel. And I'd run up to this place where he wants to go back to his hometown. And I had the idea of putting him on a light rail called the Gold Line, but I didn't know what would happen then. So here's what happened. The Lake Avenue station is 6 blocks north of the Rafters' house, and my old home is 6 miles east. Santa Mira is close to the foothills. It's arty, but funky enough to be zoned for horses. The city council voted against a Starbucks. There's a shoemaker and a butcher shop. Some rich people, who are also green, like to ride the Gold Line and then talk about the urban experience. All that means is a homeless guy talking to his hand puppet. The car I'm in is almost deserted except for a blind man and his dog, a big cream-colored Labrador. She's lying with her face on her paws, but sits up when I settle across from her. She looks pretty good. My mother used to organize intervention and rescue because some blind people take all their troubles out on their dogs. But this one doesn't have a mark on her. And I say to her owner, since she's not really working right now, do you mind if I pet your dog? And the blind man turns toward my voice. Well, I'm sure Brandy wouldn't mind. What do you think, girl? And Brandy stands up and smiles. And I mean that. Her mouth curves up in a grin and her eyes sparkle. I take her head between my hands and lean until my forehead touches hers. And Brandy says to me, you're doing okay, Teddy, under the circumstances. Keep it up. Now I put my arms around her. I can feel her wide face, her wide chest against mine, and her long face against my ear. And she adds, I have a toothache. I pat her, kiss the space between her eyes, and then press on her back end so she'll sit down. I tell the blind man, thanks. Not a problem, he says. She warmed right up to you. Usually she doesn't. And I tell him, if you take her to the vet, there's an abscessed tooth in the back on the right. The mechanical conductor calls the Santa Mira station and I stand up. Brandy's owner asks, how in the world would you know that? And I say to him, I've been around animals before. When I knew that Teddy could talk to animals, I knew I could finish this book. All the way through, in times of stress, he'll talk to an animal. He'll see a homeless guy's dog. He goes to the zoo on a field trip and he talks to the giraffe and the lion. And the giraffe says to him, go see the lions, Teddy. Boys love the big cats. Toward the end, I didn't know this till I was halfway through the book. Toward the end, I thought, oh, you know, this can't go on. He's going to lose this when he makes more friends and becomes not just an orphan, but a kid who's had some hard luck. And that of course, is what happens. But otherwise, and when I used to teach this book, when it was popular, I would go and I would sign books and talk to the students, and they would say, could he really talk to the animals? And I would honestly tell them I didn't know. I just didn't know. Why couldn't it happen? And then logical kids would say to me things like, well, he's so stressed out that he's just hallucinating. And I would say, sure. And then this kid would say, no, he can actually talk to them. And I would say, sure. I just didn't know. I was so happy to finish the book. And now it's 4:45 my time, so I know I have about 10 minutes, which is perfect, which is just about perfect. And read your poem with a lighter touch called Dear Mr. K. When I went down to the Pen Awards with Strays, and I got up on the dais, to accept it and give a little talk, I talked about how much fun it was to get mail from my readers, from my teenage readers. And it is, and it was. But this poem is not so endearing. It's a combination of 30 or 40 emails and letters I got from kids, most of whom were ordered by their teachers to write to an author. So they, the teacher had the gun to their head and, were in their side, and they said, write to somebody, and if you're lucky, he'll write back. And if he writes back, I'll give you a better grade. So they would write to me and say, for God's sake, please write back because, I'm a D student. So I tried writing this using different voices and different points of view, and it just didn't work that well. So I finally made up a narrator who is like the spokesperson for all of these desperate kids. And I think it's a he, that doesn't have to be. What he says is what 30 or 40 of these kids said, just all crammed together. God bless them, they're so honest. They don't pull any punches. They don't want to do this assignment. They're forced to write to me. So I kind of love them for a bunch of different reasons. And the poem is called Dear Mr. K because my name is so hard to pronounce and nobody remembers it and they can't spell it. If I had my life to live over again, I'd get a really cool name. My nom de plume would be Will Scarletti. I love that name. I want to be Will Scarletti. It's memorable. My dad's name was William, Ron is just a vanilla name, but it's too late now. So wait a minute. Here's Dear Mr. K. So, Mr. K, the reason I'm writing is I keep seeing deeper meanings in your poems, but my friends say there's nothing there. In that one poem where you go to the racetrack, I think the rain stands for something, but everybody says it's just rain. You can settle things if you are kind and want to write back. I saw your picture somewhere online, and you look kind for an older old person. Do you do anything special to not look as old as you might look if you didn't do anything? Like a vitamin, maybe. I showed my father your poems, and he said, huh? See, that's an example of something my teacher calls compression, meaning a lot without saying a lot. Your poems are not very compressed, Mr. K. They are all over the place. They sprawl on the page like lazy cats. Do you like that simile? I sort of learned that from you. Okay, I agree with my father, and nobody makes similes for a living. Or maybe I'm wrong. How much do you make per year, or even per month, or even per simile? If that's too nosy, pretend I didn't ask. I like you as a poet. You're very simple to read compared to famous poets. I showed my mother your poems too. She laughed, but not at the funny ones. Write back, okay, soon if you can. My grandfather looked pretty good like you do, but he died in church sitting up. Well, that's all for now. It's raining outside. If I was a poet, it would probably stand for something, but I'm not, so it's just rain. Thank you. Don't you just love that? How about a two-poem warning, and everybody will be happy. I'll read a short poem, and then I'll read the last poem, the one I asked to be warned about. I don't have the strongest voice in the world, and I'm about out of water. The short poem is called Snowman. This poem is anthologized a lot. And I get, not as many letters. People in big anthologies for grown-ups, people don't bother to write to the poets. It's kids who write to the poets. But I get a few emails about this one. You can see how short it is. There it is. It's the little guy. And the title is obvious, called Snowman. Here's the poem. He's perfect, especially those black eyes that look into hers constantly. She makes a hole in his chest, shoves in a valentine that says, be mine. His arms wide out in a constant welcome, the things she whispers that make him melt. That's the problem with love like hers, how to tell him without killing him.
5 minutes.
Wonderful. I'll take a little less. Well, maybe not. I'm going to talk about Mattress Palace, so maybe I'll come in right on time. Well, shucks. Let me turn to the larger glasses. Good heavens. Aha. So this poem called Mattress Palace answers the question, like I said 45 minutes ago. How did you know, or when did you know you were going to be a writer? It's autobiographical, but I zoomed with some people in Wales the other day, and they were talking about, oh, I don't want to write in first person because people will think it's autobiographical and it's not really, I've changed things. And I said, you can't worry about things like that. So this is autobiographical in the sense of, I did work at a mattress warehouse right when I graduated from college, and I was lost. I didn't know what to do with my life. I was living in a little Midwestern town. I was living with my parents. I needed a job, but I was at loose ends completely. I'd written some. I hadn't gone to grad school. I wasn't running with poets like I did in grad school. and after. But I had an experience working that job. And this poem is about that experience. So picture me down on the belt line. You know what belt lines look like? They go around little funky towns and the town inside dies. So I'm down on the belt line in this enormous building that sold mattresses. That's all we sold, mattresses and box springs. So picture me there. I'm 21. Yeah, I'm 21. When couples finished whispering about their savings accounts, I'd urge them to lie down on one of the sleigh beds while I imagined a Russian winter complete with wolves or samovars, or to lie over here in the industrial-sized bed with elegantly refined detail, including a time clock and maybe a whistle. I was a pretty good salesman, so indifferent to success that I was successful. Maybe because I didn't want to go home to my room, to my anxious parents, and to the homework from the one night class I was taking at Southern Illinois University. The only bed I couldn't sell was the round one with the red silk sheets. The men were awed by that one, but their wives would tug, anxious to pay for the Simmons beauty rest, and at last maybe get a good night's sleep. In the office beneath calendars featuring blondes in black negligees looking rested, we'd do the homework. I'm sorry, the paperwork. Shake hands all around, and then I was alone with shafts of sunlight coming through the tall, dirty windows. Usually, I'd step outside and smoke. But one day, a goddess descended, hair aflame with the afternoon light. She took my face in her two hands and said, "Ronnie, save yourself." I woke up on the ground. I'd fainted. I had a seizure, and the doctor, a smoker in those days with a smoker's cough, said, "Well, I wouldn't worry about it unless it happens again." The next day, I kissed my mother goodbye. I told my girlfriend I was sorry. I pointed my green Plymouth west, of course, and every night I parked in lots where enormous trucks idled and men swore at the food 100 yards away, and I dreamed of a white room, a pin with a cap off, a chair with a shirt thrown across the back, a shirt I would put on against the chill of the morning as I sat down to become the man, apparently, I was supposed to be. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to read to you. I hope you had a good time. I certainly did. I'm gonna go find my wife. I'm gonna get a drink. I'm gonna come back. We're gonna listen to you guys read for about half an hour, and then I'm gonna go back, get off of this Zoom and go to another one. But I wanna make you an offer. If you have a poem that you're struggling with, send it to me. Just email it to me. I'll take a look at it and I'll email you back. 2 or 3 people on this site have my email address. Just ask them. I'll give it to you. It's ronkoe@earthlink.net, but somebody has it. I'd be happy to look at your poems. So thanks again.